You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Take a look. Reuters has this. Taiwan and Japan are voicing concern over Chinese military activities in the region. This is coming after Reuters reported that Beijing had deployed a large number of vessels across East Asian waters this week. It's its largest maritime show of force to date. Reuters also exclusively reporting on Thursday that China was deploying a large number of naval and Coast Guard ships across East Asian waters. At one point, they say more than 100 of them, and they're citing sources and intelligence reports reviewed by Reuters. Hal Kempfer, still here with me. He's a retired Marine intelligence officer, host of the Strat podcast. So, Hal, China views democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory. Taiwan obviously rejects that. Why might China be making the moves that they're making right now?
Well, they're looking across the South China Sea. They're also looking at the East China Sea, and you have over 100 vessels. Now it has slightly decreased to I think it was somewhere in the mid 90s or something now. But the peak was 100 vessels that were all maneuvering and doing a big training exercise. Historically speaking, when nations have done major attacks, all right, invasions and stuff, usually there's a quote training exercise unquote going on in the background, and they just keep going. If you look at Russia and Ukraine, that was a training exercise that they were doing in Belarus, that they moved all their forces into place, and then at the end of the exercise, they went south. But their operational security was so good that the Russian troops didn't know, and they sold the fuel in their vehicles for gasoline, and the whole thing came to a screeching halt. But I mean, for vodka, I'm sorry, sold their fuel for vodka, and then the whole thing kind of broke down. What you're seeing here, though, is this massive array of maritime capability and other forces, air component, doing things like practicing blockading, around Taiwan, and also things around some of those disputed areas in the East China Sea with Japan. Is everyone concerned? And part of it is because Japan and Taiwan are rapidly building up their defensive forces, and China could say, now's the time to do it. If we wait a year or 2 years, if we wait till 2027 or wait till 2030, they will have enough air defense, anti-ship missiles, everything else in place that we won't be nearly as successful. And even though China doesn't have everything it wants right now to launch a massive invasion, it's a back and forth. What do we have for offensive capability versus what do they have for defensive capability? And so the fear is that China might use this as a pretext to launch a massive military attack on Taiwan, or attack on Taiwan and other parts of the West Pacific area in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. So that's why everybody's watching it very closely, and they're all very nervous about it. And there's a lot of things going on. Taiwan has a huge $40 billion investment that they had approved, or it's kind of approved, that was going to go into building up a lot of defensive capabilities. And you have the Kuomintang party, which has really become somewhat pro-PRC in more recent years, has been blocking full implementation of that. And I think China's thinking, well, why don't we do this? And maybe that will bolster those anti-independent, more independent Taiwan political elements there, maybe cow them into fear to avoid investing more into their own defensive capabilities. That may be some of the Chinese psychology that's at play here. Might be some of the same thing they're trying to do with Japan, saying, if you build up your military capabilities, we're going to keep doing things like this. That may be the PRC psychology. I don't think that's really going to work with Japan. I really can't predict how it's going to roll out within Taiwanese politics, but hopefully it won't work. In fact, if anything, usually when you do stuff like that, that bolsters those that say we need to have strong national defense. And so it may actually do the exact opposite of what China may be intending.
A live look at the White House, approaching 7:30 in the nation's capital. Hal, you know this. Late last month, we learned that Taiwan plans to add an extra $40 billion in defense spending to counter China. And that came after the U.S. recommended that Taiwan do such a thing. Let's say China does move forward with some sort of military action against Taiwan. How do we expect the U.S. might respond to that?
Well, the U.S. would have to move in very quickly. We would probably try to put as many naval assets and air assets in there. They've wargamed this many times, and I got to tell you, it is at enormous cost that we would prevail. All right. In these war games, we do prevail, but it is at enormous cost. Now, one of the things I would point out is one of our best carriers is currently tied up, so to speak. It's not tied up literally, but it's in the Caribbean dealing with the Venezuela situation. That's the Gerald R. Ford. That is a carrier, and it's been brought many times. That's probably a carrier we would love to have in the West Pacific right now to be a deterrent to China doing anything. So, it gets into the China Carrier Task Force math, but also where our forces arrayed out there. But we would bring in as many forces to bolster them. China, PRC would of course try to do interdiction of those forces and try to block those supply lanes from coming in to help Taiwan. And they would hope to isolate Taiwan for a period of time, degrade their defenses, probably use a lot of special operations capability to go in and do direct strikes on a variety of things there, and then try to take over Taiwan through some sort of amphibious assault, amphibious invasion. That would be what they're going to try to do. Taiwan, on the other hand, has about 150,000 troops, full active duty. They've got somewhere around 1.6 million reserves. Reserves are kind of a questionable thing. They haven't been putting the investment in the reserve component that they should. And some of their units are really not where they should be in percentage of readiness, but they do have a lot of capabilities here. And it would be difficult to do an amphibious assault on Taiwan. In fact, back in World War II, we had looked at doing an amphibious assault on what was called Formosa back then, which is Taiwan. And we chose not to do it because, well, the Japanese held it. That's where we're going to attack. But also the terrain. There's only so many landing beaches. There's some very steep, difficult terrain you have to deal with. And we just didn't see it as a place that was really amenable to doing an amphibious assault type thing. That's what China's going to have to deal with as well.
You touched on this. I'm hoping you can expand on it. Why is Japan concerned about this?
Oh, well, that 100 ships that was arrayed out there, it was going up into offshore of Japan, up into the East China Sea. And so it was actually in and around Japanese possessions out there, some of which are contested possessions that are out there. And so what Japan is looking at, and another thing I should mention is Japan has really been stepping up to say that they will back Taiwan in the case of an invasion. And that's part of what this is to put political pressure on Japan to back off from that commitment to support Taiwan in the case of military action by the PRC. So Japan is looking at this and saying if they do something, they will probably do something preemptively against Japan in order to limit their capabilities to back up Taiwan. And so Japan is very concerned about this buildup of forces, not just the fact that forces are there, but also all the other things around that, which is Japan's commitment to assist Taiwan in the case of a military action by the PRC.
So, big picture here. What's the likelihood nothing comes of these Chinese military movements, Hal?
More likely than not, that it's an intimidation exercise, and they'll probably stand down. But it's to be seen how far they will go. There could be some confrontations at sea. That's been a big problem. The Chinese have been very aggressive in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, but particularly the South China Sea. And there could be, as they like to say, paint could get scraped, where ships will literally position themselves where they bump into each other. They don't normally sink each other, but they will, sometimes, bump each other and scrape some paint on each ship. And that's, of course, always a very perilous situation. So they're going to watch that. Then they're also going to watch air. And the fear is that China might do something so provocative it could initiate an air defense action, which could result in fatalities. And China has done some really haphazard or hazardous stuff in the air, and they have actually lost aviators because of that as well. So A lot of concerns that a mistake could be made, and this could trigger off some sort of larger military action.
Hal Kempfer being generous with his time, as he always is, every Saturday with us. Hal is a retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and the host of the Strat podcast. What's coming up on Strat, Hal?
Well, thanks for asking. I'm going to talk about the changing situation with European security. And I'm going to talk about how Europe is having to build up and take on a greater role in its own investment in security. Some of the things that they're doing with Ukraine and how this new national security strategy by the U.S. is really changing the way that we're looking at the world, but also changing the way that the Europeans perceive the U.S. commitment to their security. So I'm going to kind of get into the details on that and why it's such a huge shift. And I think it's something that's been coming for some time. But I think when all the European capitals saw this document, it really caused them to turn their heads very quickly and say, okay, we really got to step it up even more.
Hal Kempfer's Strat podcast, available anywhere you can listen to podcasts. Hal, have a good rest of your weekend.
All right. You too, Austin.
Thanks.